Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller, and you have turned into your Alaska Weather, brought to you by the National Weather Service. And tonight is December 12th, 2017. Happy birthday to my big sister. As always, you can get in touch with us at 1-800-472-0391. And if you follow any of the command prompts, it will get you to any of the three offices around the state, the Fairbanks, Juneau, or Anchorage office, and get you any of the Alaska weather you're looking for. Our homepage is weather.gov/Alaska, and again, that will be a statewide perspective, allowing you to access any of the information around the entire state. And if you need to get in touch with us here at the TV desk, nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov, and Mr. Snider or one of us will get back in touch with you as soon as possible. So let's take a look at what we've got going on in our headlines for tonight. Warm and moist southerly flow will continue. We've been seeing this trend from south to north across the North Pacific into the south central portion of the state and up through the northern portion of the state. That is going to continue and continue to be our dominant weather pattern, at least through the next couple days. Mixed precipitation because of that warm, moist air coming up, and so we do have freezing rain to talk about and our hazards. And gusty winds are going to continue through the terrain and even over parts of southeast Alaska, parts of south central Alaska. Those gusty winds with that strong flow coming from south to north, especially as it goes through the terrain, the Alaska Range, the Aleutian Range. So how about those hazards? Well, as you can see here along the Alaska Range, this is the red is for a high wind warning, the yellow is for a high wind advisory, and this is until about 6 a.m. on Thursday morning from the Fairbanks office. So if you're traveling through these areas, please be advised of some strong winds moving through those areas. And then over here is our winter storm warning in red and our winter storm advisory in yellow. And so this is for the mainly for the lower Yukon Valley. The winter storm warning is in effect until 3 p.m. on Wednesday. And this is for up to 0.2 of an inch of ice from some freezing rain. And so with that, there could be a little bit of snow, but the biggest hazard is going to be the ice impacting travel, potential impact to power lines, things like that. So be advised that that freezing rain could become a very big headache for those in that area. So keep an eye on your forecast. Heaviest should be west of Galena. And then along the coast there, that's where we have the advisory, and that is mainly for up to 1/10 of an inch of ice. So not quite as heavy expected as the inland areas there and just west of Galena. And then finally, our last hazard here is a winter weather advisory up along the Arctic coastline, and that is for blowing snow, primarily with a little bit of falling snow, about 1 to 3 inches. And again, this is in effect until 3 p.m. on Thursday, so almost 24 hours from now, 3 p.m. on Thursday. These guys are 3 p.m. Wednesday, and these guys are 6 a.m. Thursday. And let's keep going there. Oh, and don't forget there, just on the north side of the Norton Sound, there is another piece of that advisory in case you missed that. Hard to see on that map. Let's take a look at our satellite. Here you can see that south flow moving off to the north. And every few hours, it seems like we have a new system develop along this flow. When you start to wrap this cold air in and this warm, moist air, it doesn't take much to get a spin up in the atmosphere. So here we have one spin. There's another one just to the west of Sandpoint. And then there's a few little areas of energy moving along the west coast there, helping to continue to keep the precipitation falling through that region. So let's take a look at that loop again. And you can see that strong plume of moisture, these high white cloud tops moving from south to north. And then again, back over here, the little bit of colder air, kind of that pockmarked satellite appearance that we've talked about, and you can see that there spilling down through much of the Bering Sea. How about for southeast Alaska on the satellite loop? Well, plenty of cloud cover for you all as well. That strong south to north flow impacting southeast Alaska as well, starting to push more rain into areas south, basically of Sitka, into the south and east towards Ketchikan. And we do expect more rain to start to surge to the north there. Let's put that loop into motion one more time, and you can see all that moisture moving up. So after a brief break for parts of southern Alaska, we're starting to see more rain reinforced along the coast here, and again, stronger winds starting to push in, especially in those areas that favor the south or southeast winds, Copper River Basin, Turnagain Arm, those type of locations. So as we get into our surface map now, you can see the several areas of lower pressure, trough here along the west coast, and then our low down over the Alaska Peninsula. And there we see plenty of rain moving in, moderate rain reported at Portage, and some strong rain reported also into the Whittier area. And there's our freezing rain there right along the west coast. There's helping to bring that advisory and that winter storm warning to parts of the lower Yukon Valley. Up along the Arctic coastline there, that's where we have the blowing snow and the winter weather advisory in effect for them. And it's, again, not a lot of accumulating snow. 1 to 3 inches is expected, but it is already blowing around up there. Strong easterly flow moving across the Arctic coast. Back out over the Bering Sea, just some snow showers in advance of our next system that we'll talk about here as we step forward. But first we look at southeast Alaska, and there you can see the rain and some lower visibilities with some fog starting to work in. We do expect that this is snow in the higher elevations. Tough to get reports sometimes, but snow up towards Thompson Pass, and likely some snow showers starting already in the higher elevations of southeast Alaska. So on into tonight now, and we can see that that area of low pressure that was stretched out in a couple different pieces now kind of consolidates overnight, and we have that rain reinforced along the coastal areas, basically stretching all the way from west to east, south central Alaska off to southeast Alaska. Some of that rain we do expect to be moderate along the coastal areas, and then it will slowly turn to snow as it starts to push inland, mainly over higher terrain, not really expecting any snow to fall at the sea level here with temperatures still in the mid-30s across the area, but do expect that to transition to snow as it makes its way inland and into the higher terrain. Freezing rain will continue for southwest and portions of western Alaska, and then there up along the Arctic coastline we have that blowing snow and a little bit of falling snow there as you move towards Cape Lisburne area. Out over the Bering Sea, snow showers will continue, and our next system is trying to make its way in here. This is going to ultimately shift the pattern, but it's going to take a little while for that to happen. So what do we look like on Wednesday? Well, it's not going to be all that different. Freezing rain will continue through parts of the lower Yukon Valley, maybe stretching even a little bit further inland towards the Alaska range. Snow possible out over southwest Alaska, nothing heavy expected, and then rain as you get farther to the south along the Aleutian Range. Rain will continue along the southern portions of the state, especially along the Gulf Coast there. Expect that rain to be heavy at times for places like Yakutat and up towards the Chilkoot and White areas there to the northern portion of southeast Alaska. Otherwise, rain in abundance will be the story for southeast Alaska as we go through Wednesday. Those winds will also be coming up, as you can see there, the tighter lines there, bringing up the stronger south to north flow, starting to impact the marine areas, and we'll get to that here in just a few minutes. Blowing snow will continue along the Arctic coastline, and falling snow will continue over northwest Alaska with weak low pressure out there. And then by Thursday, the pattern kind of opens up a little bit. We don't see any real strong systems anywhere in the domain, but what we do have is just kind of lingering snow showers around the area in the interior, some lingering rain showers out over the southern portion of the state and the coastal areas, and that'll stretch down into southeast Alaska where the most abundant precipitation will continue as this area, or excuse me, this occluded front starts to push inland finally. And so it's not really going to be a break in the pattern per se, but it will be a relative lightening in the precipitation, and we do expect those winds to continue with this front up along the Arctic coast. And here we start to see that area of low pressure sliding off and hopefully eventually changing our pattern to a little bit more of a wintertime pattern. How about for our temperatures? Well, you can see for our lows tonight, expecting a fairly warm mid-40s for southeast Alaska with plenty of cloud cover. Plenty of cloud cover really throughout the state, so temperatures generally pretty warm for this time of year, mid-December, expecting generally around 30 for southern Alaska, in the teens to low 20s for the interior, and then expecting single digits along the Arctic coastline there with that blowing snow, more towards 30 for southwest Alaska. How about for Wednesday afternoon? Well, you can see generally in the upper 40s to low 50s for southeast Alaska. Going to be pretty warm over southern Alaska, generally in the 30s. And then as you get towards the Arctic coastline there, temperatures falling towards the teens, a little bit warmer out over the Alaska Peninsula at about 40 degrees. And then on to Thursday morning, expect temperatures to bottom out for southeast in the 40s. We'll generally be in the 30s for southern Alaska, and again, single digits Thursday morning. And by Thursday afternoon, expect temperatures to be pretty similar to Wednesday afternoon as that warm southerly flow continues. Generally, the coldest spot still hugging up there along the Arctic coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, let's jump into your flying weather now, and as you would expect with that warm air coming out from the North Pacific and the southern portion of the Bering out over the mainland, plenty of IFR conditions across the coastal areas here and then stretching up into western Alaska and even along the Brooks Range and along the North Arctic coast there. So we expect fairly widespread instrument flight rules hovering around southeast Alaska over the northern Gulf, pressed up against the eastern portion of the Kenai Peninsula, the southeastern portion of the Alaska and Aleutian Ranges, and then along western Alaska. And this is really going to be the story for the next several days as subtly warm air moves up against the terrain and certainly over the colder air that is over the interior portion of the state. MVFR conditions across the Bering, and another front will start to work into the western Bering there, so another pocket of IFR conditions. Similar story for Wednesday afternoon. IFR starts to slide a little bit further to the east in the more consolidated area, and so that'll stretch up into the Copper River Basin and then along the Alaska Range, Aleutian Range, and over into southwest Alaska. Lower ceilings, lower visibility with some blowing snow there up along the Arctic coast and along the Brooks Range, so instrument flight rules. As we get into Thursday morning, some improvement in the IFR conditions, but still seeing MVFR conditions widespread throughout much of the state. IFR will now be mainly hugging right along the coastal areas, along the southeast and northern portion of the Gulf, and then along the Alaska Range, seeing that stretch down to southwest Alaska towards King Salmon, along the Brooks Range, and continuing to keep things instrument flight rules along the Arctic coastline. Some improvement by Thursday afternoon, but the MVFR conditions will still be widespread across the state with that subtly warm air hugging up against the terrain, keeping instrument flight rules in those areas. So how about for our passes? Well, Aniktuvik Pass is going to be instrument flight rules. Not a lot of a surprise there. Adigan, similar story. Lake Clark and Merrill, also instrument flight rules, and you'll notice that theme throughout. Rainy will be instrument flight rules. Windy is going to go from marginal visual flight rules to instrument flight rules through the day. As Isabel will go from MVFR to IFR through the day. Mentassa should start out VFR with the flow the way it is and then decrease down to MVFR as we go through the day. Tanita will be MVFR, decreasing to IFR. Portage should stay IFR through the day, and Chilkoot and White finally also instrument flight rules through Wednesday. So how about our freezing levels? Well, here is kind of the map that tells much of the story. Strong southerly flow bringing a lot of this warm air, freezing levels all the way up to 8,000 feet here over the Gulf, bringing this warm air up over a colder surface. And so there you see the surface line stretching further north over western Alaska, a little bit further to the south over south central Alaska. But this is not only representative of the warm air, but it also is telling us about our precipitation types, how we have some mixed precipitation a little bit towards the interior portion of the state, some rain along the coastal areas, and even some freezing rain in pockets as you look out towards western Alaska. And then, of course, you get back to snow once you're up along the Arctic coastline there. But that map really tells a good story for what our concerns are with this warm southerly flow. How about for icing? Well, as you'd expect, pretty widespread in this pattern as well. Lots of moisture and some cold temperatures. So we have our colder, lower freezing levels out over southwest Alaska, and that's allowing some isolated moderate stretching basically from northwestern Alaska all the way down through southwest above 4,000 feet, above 6,000 and 9,000 feet here over the Gulf and southeast Alaska, and then a fairly large swath of isolated moderate above 4,000 for the western Bering. For our storm track, you can see plenty of areas of low pressure coming in along this jet at about 165 knots. It really dives down, and this is the critical portion of the jet at 130 knots. And notice the direction almost due south to north there, spilling right into south central Alaska and into the interior. So bringing that moisture and that warm air, and then coming up over this semi-permanent ridge of high pressure over the western portion of the lower 48. And that is really reflected in much of the 9,000 and 3,000 foot winds. Here's our strongest area, basically due south to north, 70 to 55 knots, stretching from northern portion of the Gulf of Alaska up towards Yakutat. Then that comes over the state and turns sharply to the east as you get from east to west as you get towards the north slope. So there's where we have those stronger winds bringing the blowing snow conditions. A little bit less intensity out over the western portion of the state, down to about 25 knots here in support of this low. And then we have it from south to north out over the western Bering. As far as 3,000 foot winds, similar story as far as the direction, but a little bit stronger, or a little bit less intensity, 50 to 60 knots here, becoming about 30 to 35 knots over the northern portion of the state. So for turbulence, well, you can see a considerable moderate, very widespread area below 6,000 and then below 4,000 feet here. As that strong wind interacts with terrain, expect very widespread, considerable moderate areas throughout the state. Stay tuned, we'll be back with your marine forecast.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is Eric Stevens, our good friend from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at UAF. And thanks for joining us, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to be here, Dave.
And we love to hear about all the fascinating developments, new and old, and how we're using the tools here, especially around Alaska. And I've got to think that, satellite meteorology right now is a fascinating time to be involved in. If we go back to the first satellite, Tyros, back in 1960, I think is when we got some of those first pictures. Weather and meteorology probably changed that day for a whole lot of people, and it's still changing today, right?
Oh, you know it. Satellite imagery is so important, and it's getting better all the time. Yeah. Of course, never perfect, but especially for us in Alaska, where there are other data sets like radars and weather balloons are so thinly spread. Right. The satellite is the great equalizer because the satellite sees everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We've got one particular issue in volcanic ash detection.
That's a big deal here. Yeah.
You know it. If you fly an airplane into volcanic ash, your jet engine might just fail. And an airplane without engines is in a world of hurt. Sure. So if there's a volcano that goes off, satellite imagery is the way to track that plume of ash and to tell pilots this is where you need to not be to avoid this ash plume. And there's a phrase out there, what's the difference? What's the difference?
Okay.
Well, it turns out, what we're going to discuss today, that the difference is everything. There's a technique called channel differencing.
Okay.
That if you take one piece of the spectrum of what the satellite detects and a slightly different wavelength of that spectrum, even though those two images might look similar, magical things happen when you subtract one from the other. And they reveal information that was already there, but it was hard to find until you did that subtraction.
That sounds like Nicolas Cage in National Treasure when he's got those fancy glasses and he's flipping one up and back and forth. I mean, is this what we're talking about?
Well, let's go more highbrow and talk Michelangelo.
Oh,
so apparently Michelangelo made some amazing sculpture and someone said, Michael, that's amazing. How did you do it? And Michelangelo's reply allegedly was, well, in that rock, the statue was already in there.
Right.
I just scraped away the unnecessary bits. In satellite meteorology, sometimes there are meteorological features that are in the data, but you can't see it until you combine or difference some of the channels.
Okay.
And we've got a case, good old Pavlov volcano goes off now and then.
Sure.
And you can observe directly a picture of the volcano. Just take it with your iPhone. You can see a volcano going
erupting.
off. Yep. Right. But if you want to get the broad view, we need satellite to do that. Now, there are a couple of wavelengths that we can look at. So what's a wavelength? That's the amount of space between a peak and a valley and another peak in a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're going to look at 12 micron wavelength and 10.8 micron wavelength.
What is a micron?
So what's a micron? Yeah, we're getting into the geek department now. A micron is a unit of length, and it is quite tiny. We're looking at what's called long wave wavelengths.
Okay.
But it takes 25,000 of these microns to make an inch. A human blood cell is about 5 microns across. So when we're talking about 12 micron imagery as allegedly long wave, well, that's relative.
Pretty short for light.
Yeah, it's other part of the, it's just an expression for the spectrum there.
Okay.
So we can look at a 12 micron image, say a satellite image. At 12 microns, we're seeing a heat signature here, really, and the way this color enhancement works is the yellow and the red stuff is high cold clouds down here over the Gulf of Alaska into South Central. And if you were asked, where do you find the volcanic ash plume in this image?
Hey, where do you find the volcanic plume in this image?
It's hard to do. I'm not sure I could find it. If you were to look at this image and just say, show me what jumps out at you here, I'd say, well, nothing really. Well, let's look. So 12 micron doesn't help us. Let's look at 10.8 microns.
All right.
All right, look at that. It's practically the same image. So where's this volcanic ash? Can't find it at 12 microns, can't really see it at 10.8, but when we subtract one channel from the other, magically the plume appears. The color enhancement here highlights the ash in blue.
Wow.
The information was already there, but we couldn't find it until we subtracted one channel from another.
Very interesting.
It's almost magical. Similarly, let's say you're looking for fog up on the North Slope. It's kind of a foggy neighborhood.
Sure.
In 11 micron and 3.9 micron, we've got a 3.9 micron image here. it's a big fuzzy blur over Barrow. We can't see where the fog is. But the information is lurking in there waiting for us to reveal it. All we have to do is find that difference between the 11 micron and the 3.9, and then this image becomes this image, and the fog bank jumps right out, and you can see it up there at Barrow. Now, you got to choose the right tool for the job.
Sure.
Like they say, you open your toolbox, all kinds of stuff in there. What do we need for this particular task? If you want to find volcanic ash, we look at 12 and 10.8 micron, find that difference. If you want to find fog, we'll look at 11 and 3.9 micron, find that difference. It's great, different tools for different jobs. Of course, there's always caveats and gotchas, but this fog procedure, it only works at night, because when the sun comes up, it gets in the way. So every product has its strengths and limitations, and in meteorology, the challenge is using the right tool for the right job, and these are some of those tools.
And discovery is still happening, even with meteorology. The weather's been around for a long time, but the tools that are being developed to understand the meteorology is fascinating and still very new science.
It's such a young science. We've come so far. And I'm getting old enough now that I can literally say that, you know, when I was a boy, we didn't have this kind of thing. And there's new things happening all the time. New satellites will be launched in coming years that will have better instruments than ever before. It's an exciting time, and this is so helpful for Alaska because satellites help fill in the gaps between other ways of observing the weather. Satellites, the great equalizer for Alaska.
Yeah, and help so many people stay safe in so many ways every day up here in the last frontier.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, protecting lives and property.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. We love to hear about this fascinating information, and boy, it just makes me want to go watch satellite pictures all day. So hopefully we're inspiring more people to do the same thing, and just be curious. It's a wonderful thing. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you next time. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for your marine forecast now. Let's start off with our sea ice. As you can see, things continue to fill in here along the Arctic coastline. There is a little bit of an opening here, and that again is partially because of that east to west flow right around Point Barrow, helping to allow a little bit of the opening in the ice. And otherwise, that southerly flow has helped it to stay just a little bit offshore, but we do expect once that flow comes down, this should continue to consolidate, and then we are starting to fill in and cut off a little bit more of the Bering Strait, as you can see down there south of Point Hope. So now into our southeast marines, and you can see for Wednesday afternoon, going to be pretty gusty out of the southeast. Winds generally a south or southeast, 25 to 30 knots with gusts up to 35 there in the central portions of the inner passageways. And then over the open waters, southeast winds all the way up to 45 knots. So approaching storm force, seas are going to be between 17 and 19 feet for the offshore areas and 5 to 6 feet for the inner water passageways. As you can see now on Thursday, we can see things sliding off to the southwest, 25 to 30 knots, seas generally between 17 and 19 feet. And then over the inner passageways up towards Lynn Canal and down towards Dixon Entrance, 20 to 30 knots southerly flow, and seas 4 all the way up to 9 feet down towards Dixon Entrance. For South Central on Wednesday, you can expect generally a southeast wind out over the open waters, and then more of a northeast down inlet flow for Cook Inlet, generally between 30 and 35 knots, and seas running about 7 feet where protected, and closer to 13 to 15 feet out over the open waters, all the way up to 18 feet here just outside of Prince William Sound. And then on Thursday, things start to calm down a little bit more, becoming a little bit more variable flow around the area, 10 to 15 knots, and seas generally between 2 to 3 feet on the protected areas and up towards 10 feet on the offshore areas. For the Alaska Peninsula on Wednesday, you can see the northwest to westerly winds on the north side of the chain, 10 to 20 knots, seas between 3 and 9 feet, becoming more west and southerly as you get towards Kodiak Island, 20 to 25 knots, seas about 12 feet. On Thursday, continue to see much of that variable flow, generally a south to southwest, but some a little bit more variability and calm, 10 to 25 knots, so not a whole lot of activity in this region here, and seas generally between 2 and 8 feet. And then all over the Aleutian chain on Wednesday, you can expect southeast and southerly winds for most of the central and eastern Aleutians between 20 and 25 knots, becoming more northwesterly here towards Unalaska Bay, and seas are going to be between about 9 and 10 feet in that region, closer to the 8-foot region or 8-foot mark for central Aleutians. On into Thursday then, you can see southeast winds and southerly winds for the eastern Aleutians. about 30 to 35 knots and seas 7 to 10 feet. Out towards the western Aleutians, southwest and westerly flow, 15 to 25 knots, seas 7 to 14 feet. Towards the west coast on Wednesday, generally a northwest to northerly wind between 15 and 20 knots, not too stiff out there, and then generally 8-foot seas. And then on into Thursday, southerly winds just south or in for the Norton Sound, but a little bit more confused westerly and easterly flow off the west coast there, generally between 10 and 30 knots, seas between 3 to 6 feet. And then up for the Arctic coast on Wednesday, there's that strong easterly flow that we talked about with the sea ice edge, helping to keep a little bit more of ice open towards the west coast of Point Barrow, and generally about 30 knots, becoming 35 knots gale force there off of Wainwright, and that'll continue to help to produce some 5-foot seas there in towards Kivalina, and then northwest 20 knots, 8-foot seas just south of the Seward Peninsula. And then easterly winds will continue to about 35 knots on Thursday, and expect the generally more confused flow along the west coast there, 20 to 35 knots, seas between 4 and 5 feet where the ice has not filled in just yet. So for tonight's weather, again, we have several winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings. Our winter storm warning is right here along the corridor of the lower Yukon Valley, and that will be for freezing rain up to 0.2 of an inch of ice, and that is in effect until 3 p.m. on Wednesday. Heaviest accumulations expected west of Galena. And then towards the Alaska Range, we do have a high wind warning in effect for strong southerly winds, and a high wind advisory a little bit further north towards the Tanana Valley for strong winds as well. And then up along the Arctic coastline there, we have some blowing snow and some falling snow, 1 to 3 inches. So a winter weather advisory in effect for those folks until about 3 p.m. 3 p.m. Thursday, with the continued blowing conditions. So on into Wednesday, there we see the freezing rain continue. Southeast, you'll expect heavy precip to move back in, especially over the northern portion of the Gulf. And then things start to finally quiet down by Thursday as those advisories and those warnings do come down. Expect still continued wet conditions along the Gulf Coast with a little bit more scattered showers interior.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.